Many of you requested that I talk a little bit more about the hippie days in Boulder uh, in some of my own bullshit items, such as having COVID, RSV, and another virus within a month of each other. Um, so I want to go back to the 60s when the hippies first arrived. There was a lot of animosity here. We had a DA here named Stan Johnson who made a big reputation with his constituency for prosecuting students for writing short checks. He was very much in favor of the merchants, and he was favored by the merchants. And that was his constituency. So when I started out, I had a lot of short check cases. In fact, one of them was from a classmate of my brother's who was going to see you at the time. And generally what you did is you made restitution arrangements, and the cases got dropped, the merchants got paid, and everybody was happy. But you had a lot of people moving in from out of town. And not only that, they were moving in from the east. And one of the things that the Easterners didn't understand was Western water law, right of first appropriation, etc. So I spent a lot of time in those types of cases. And in fact, one of my first cases was driving livestock from its natural range. It happened about 6 or 7 miles west of Boulder in a town, in an area called Brownsville. And Brownsville was being subdivided, but like a lot of the other suburban areas around Denver, it had horse property. It was sort of an acre, and you could graze a horse and feed it hay and keep the horse there, and they had horse trails, etc. Well, one of the old rancher types didn't like his neighbor's horse because it kept grazing on his property if the fence was open, etc. So he drove it off a couple times. The horse ran away, and the DA from New York used to like to pretend he was a cowboy. He was the honorary marshal at the Boulder powwow, which was the Boulder rodeo. He wore cowboy boots to work and really played the role. He was a former FBI agent and had a lot of war stories that he would tell people about the days in the FBI. Mainly he was in the Red Squad area that used to break into people's places, and he was the leader of the anti-communist squad in Boulder. In any event, he prosecuted my client for driving livestock from its natural range. Well, I grew up about 30 miles away from here, and we had a lot of range land. There wasn't any open range left. That sort of got taken care of with the Johnson County War in Johnson County, northern Wyoming, right on the border with Montana. And in fact, there was a regulator named Tom Horn that lived in Boulder, and his house was still there. And he was prosecuted for murder for shooting sheep herders. And when they opened up and abolished the open range in Wyoming, they had a range war up there between the sheep herders, who were mostly immigrants, and the cowboys, who all belonged to the Stock Association. Ended up that they attacked this town in northern Wyoming that had immigrants and sheep herders, tried to keep them off the open range. And that sort of abolished the open range. I had some cousins that had a ranch in North Park. It was a pretty good sized one. My law partner back then, Charles Avil, his family had the biggest land grant in the world. It ended up being part of the Maxwell Grant, which was the size of West Virginia at one time. Anyway, that was a local history, of course. The FBI agent, former FBI agent that became the cowboy prosecutor, had no idea what open range meant, and he just thought moving it from one person's 1 or 2 acre lots outside of it was doing that. So I got through a lot of motions. I had expert witnesses talk about what an open range was, what it was meant to be, and things like that. And I finally got the case dismissed, which kind of established me in a little bit. And we'll go on and talk about a few other cases. I had a marijuana case where they had him dead to rights, and an old man from Louisville said he wasn't going to convict somebody of having something that grew wild in the ditches around Colorado. And I can remember my days growing up, we had marijuana in some of the ditches in Loveland. Anyway, I'll get on to one of my drug trials. So at first, I was the only lawyer in the whole area that would really take a drug case because it was looked upon with opprobrium. And they looked down on drugs, they looked down on drug attorneys, and the judges tended to persecute and punish and frown on lawyers that took drug cases. Since I didn't really plan to stay in practice, I didn't really give a shit. I was waiting for the war to stop so I could resume the situation at University of Wisconsin. They told me to go play around for a year, the war will be over, they'll get their funding back, and I can go there and get my fellowship, which didn't happen because it was when I got out of law school, it was 1967, and the war was just gearing up. But that's another story. The reason I got into drug policy and drug cases was I was listed as a tax expert because I had graduate law school courses in taxes, things like how to merge General Motors and Chrysler, and things like this. When I was in law school, they told me lawyers don't fill out tax returns, and I went to work for a tax lawyer, and that's what he did. He was also a CPA at one time. Anyway, I didn't really particularly like the tax work, but at that time, marijuana possession and drug possession in general was under the revenue code. So the first client, hippie that I got in Boulder, was charged, and he read it was under the Tax Act, so he looked for a tax lawyer and ended up in my office. Well, there's several cases resulted from that because his grandfather was a U.S. Senator from a southern state. In the meantime, for quite a while, I was the only one that would do a marijuana case, and that branched out into other cases, and you had different groups coming in. You had the hippies coming in, you had the Divine Light Mission that I'd represented that did LSD, and you had the speed freaks, I forget what the hell they called themselves, and you had the STP family. All of them were identifiable and prosecutable by the police agencies, and they were on the shit list, and every time the cops got a chance they would bust them. So one time they busted a bunch of people that belonged to a group that used methamphetamine and cocaine, and we go to the preliminary hearing, and there's 6 of them, and I had a crew of 6 lawyers that I pretty much regularly worked with, younger lawyers that would do drug cases. And that's when they started learning that there was some money in the drug enforcement defense, because a lot of the people charged with drug offenses happened to come from wealthy families whose parents sent them to University of Colorado, which was known as a party school, and was a couple thousand miles or 1,500 miles at least from the East Coast areas where they were from, and the parents could live their lives without their kids being around, and they could take them out when they wanted to show them off or talk to them or see them or visit them or whatever. Otherwise, then they shipped them back with a bus or plane or whatever back to Boulder with the checkbooks and forgot about them. In any event, we had a case involving some methamphetamine. We were at a preliminary hearing, and all of a sudden, some of the defendants said, "You got to call a break. We got to go to the bathroom. We got to go to the bathroom." So we asked for a recess, and the court was adjourned for 20 minutes, and all of our clients rushed to the bathroom, and we decided we should go to the bathroom too while there was a break. But somebody was blocking the door. Finally, after pushing and shouting and things like that, we were allowed in the bathroom. And you got to imagine this scene. It's got 6 defendants and 6 lawyers in the place, and I look around, and all the 6 defendants were shooting up methamphetamine, which really was an interesting thing because they were essentially committing a crime in front of us. So we were supposed to turn them in, but we didn't talk to them then. We decided not to. We sort of gracefully turned our backs and walked out of the bathroom and waited for them to come out before we all went in. But it was interesting back in those days how prevalent the drug usage was and how some of these people acted as though it were not against the law whatsoever, and rather than advocating or whatever, they just went ahead and did it. And there was a lot of times I had cases where the clients would go to the bathroom and pull out a joint and smoke it so they could get through their hearings and things like this. So it was kind of an interesting time. You have people running around in colorful costumes. There was a group called Hare Krishners that wore robes and went around beating on tom-toms and chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. I had another group up in Sunshine Canyon and also over in, I think it was Windsor, Colorado, and they were making LSD. They called themselves the Sunshine Group, or we formed a corporation called Sunshine Incorporated. And the corporation at one time bought the Trident Theater, or the rights to the Trident Theater. I don't know if they ever closed on it. Trident was in Marin County in California. So there was a lot of commutation or commuters going between California, particularly the Bay Area and Boulder. And for years, the feds thought the LSD was coming from the Bay Area and not from the Colorado area. It was a well-kept secret. That finally got out when the group moved to Berkeley in the Haight-Ashbury district and things like that. Also during that time, Boulder started to become a music center. It was a stopover from people from the East Coast in Chicago going to the West Coast. Caribou Ranch was started in Boulder. A lot of musicians went up to that to get their start. They recorded up there, they partied up there. It was quite a place to go. I knew many of the musicians that played up there and recorded up there. I met them in a lot of places in and about the area. One of the things they did about the time of the STP trial was a company was making a movie called Stagecoach in Boulder, starring Anne Margaret and a few other stars, which was interesting because we'd occasionally catch them drinking at the Boulder Auto Hotel and things such as that. Those were interesting times. The literary people moved out here. They filmed a television show called Mork and Mindy, using Boulder as sort of a prop. Another movie was filmed at the President's House at University of Colorado, the Stanley Hotel up in Estes Park. They had a film filmed there starring Jack Nicholson. Really kind of a spooky movie. All of these things were going on, and the local merchants and police didn't quite know how to take it. They didn't know how to adjust to it. And they resisted with great resilience in order to maintain the status quo, because it was obvious that the power elite of Boulder were losing power by the hour. And they were losing it to East and West Coast money. And they highly resented it. It was bad enough when Kodak moved into Windsor and IBM moved into Boulder, but when they started taking over the social structure, that was structured according to C. Wright Mills at least, they got resentful and the shit hit the fan. We had one cop essentially admit to a couple murders of the hippies. Hippies disappeared. They ended up dead. They disrupted the life in Boulder, and they disrupted a lot of the underground intelligence people that lived in Boulder and worked out of Boulder, pretty much exposing Boulder to like a secure national security state, only nobody really appreciated the fact at that time. Anyway, we went back into court after the kids shot up, and they were very energetic at that time, paid attention to the trial, and we got bound over for a trial in district court and eventually settled the case. But it was a really interesting experience to walk into a bathroom and see your client with a needle in his arm during the middle of a drug trial. It gave us a lot different perspective on things. Anyway, I hope you push the like button. I hope you request some more information and some more of these little stories of 50 years ago. I hope you start requesting them pretty much, because the older I get, the harder it gets to remember such things. And I'm trying to get a history of a half century of practicing law in about 25 different states, which had been my experience both in state and federal court. Thank you for watching, and this is Dennis out.